Hi, everybody. It's a special part of the scriptures tonight. We're truly on holy ground. It will be Mark chapter 14. This is actually session number 15. And as I mentioned, we're coming to the end, which is then our beginning. But we're coming to the end. Jesus has now made his way up to Jerusalem for the last time, and it's Passover's near, his death is near, and so these are preparations. But throughout this entire chapter, I want you to keep in mind who's in charge. Even in the midst of chaos, even in the midst of deep demonic spiritual activity, I want you to remember who is in charge and who is determining the timing. So let's pray. Jesus, we want to thank you for holy ground. We want to thank you for your gift to us. We want to thank you that that's you, who knew no sin, took our sin upon yourself, that we might be forgiven, restored, redeemed, and whole. We thank you for this gift, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. Okay, as I mentioned, we're now in Jerusalem. Passover's near. Chapter 14, after 2 days it was the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by trickery and put him to death. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar of the people. Passover, kind of Leviticus chapter 23, verse 6. It's on the 15th day of Nisan, right? On the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That happens 7 days after Passover. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it, but you shall offer an offering made by fire for the Lord, or to the Lord, for 7 days. The seventh day shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. Again, Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread. Just want to set the stage, so to speak. And now back to Bethany. Remember, on the other side of the Mount of Olives. And being in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came having an alabaster flask of very costly oil of spikenard. And then she broke the flask and poured it on his head. But there were some who were indignant among themselves and said, "Why was this fragrant oil wasted? For it might have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor." And they criticized her sharply. Now, John tells us that this was Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. In John chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, this is where we read this same event taking place. And again, let me just read those verses. Now, a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. And this oil was no cheap knockoff, I guess you would say. Spikenard, even today, is a flowering plant that grows in the area of Nepal, the Himalayas, and China and India. It's crushed and distilled into an intensely aromatic, amber-colored essential oil, which is very thick in its consistency. Nard oil is used both as a perfume, incense, a sedative, and herbal medicine. So again, the cost, 300 denarii, it said, that'd be around $6,000. about 1 year's wage for the common worker, probably part of Mary's dowry. And so there were those on the sidelines that were critical of it. I wanted to give you an idea of what the cost would be. And again, Jesus is going to, well, let's just take a look. In verse 6, Jesus says, "Let her alone. Why do you trouble her? She's done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, and whenever you wish, you may do them good. But me you do not have always. She has done what she could. She has come beforehand to anoint my body for burial. Assuredly, I say to you, wherever the gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her." And indeed, that's true. In fact, we just read it, and it's recorded in 3 of the 4 Gospels. And so, once again, setting that stage, holy ground tonight, Jesus' body is being anointed, first and foremost, right here for his burial. He is the Son of Man who's come to give his life as a ransom for many. At this time, he is not the conquering Messiah that's driving out the Romans. That too we need to keep in mind as we go through this day. Now, Jesus is going to now deal with Judas. Verse 10 says, "Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went to the chief priests to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad, and they promised to give him money. And so he sought how he might conveniently betray him." Now, as I've mentioned often in my teachings, of the 12 disciples, 11 of them were from the Galilee. The only one that was not is Judas. He was from a town that's about 10 miles south of Hebron. Again, he was promised money, given money. We know it's 30 shekels. That's about $12,254. 30 pieces of silver was the price of a common slave. You can see that in Exodus 31, verse 32. Exodus 21, verse 32, and Zechariah 11, verses 12 and 13. And so now Jesus, this is, again, as the timeline continues, we have the betrayer, and now Jesus is going to celebrate the Passover with his disciples. Now, on the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare that you may eat the Passover?" And he sent out 2 of his disciples, and he said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher." Note that a man will meet you carrying a pitcher. That's a sign, because in those days, no man, unless he was an Essene, would be carrying a pitcher. That's a woman's job. So verse 14, whenever he goes in, wherever he goes in, this man carrying a pitcher, say to the master of the house, "The teacher says, where's the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And then he will show you a large upper room, furnished, prepared. There make ready for us." So his disciples went out, and they came into the city, and they found it just as he had said to them, and they prepared the Passover. Once again, scripted. Who's in control of every detail of this day? As I mentioned, the Essenes, Dead Sea Scrolls. Think about, that's the community of the Essenes. There were some living in Jerusalem, but because of their purity laws, they had to remain celibate in the holy city, and therefore they had to carry their own water. That would be the key, the mark, in a sense, that Jesus was pointing out. Jesus probably chose an area where he wouldn't be looked for, as presumably a warrant was already out for his arrest after the havoc that he caused with the money changers and the sacrifices and the pro-Jesus political demonstration on Palm Sunday. Therefore, he probably chose the Essene area of Jerusalem. And I've included a map on your PDF. So those of you that have been to Israel, if you remember that area where the Zion Gate is, you can look at this map. Also, if we go out the Zion Gate and we went down the valley into the valley of Hinnom, there's Sultan's Pool down in that area. This would have been the area where the Essenes were at. And again, I've given you some photos of Qumran because that is the community where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found that was populated by the Essenes. And so verse 17, in the evening he came with the 12. Now as they sat and ate, Jesus said, assuredly I say to you, one of you who eats with me will betray me. And they began to be sorrowful and to say to him one by one, is it I? And another said, is it I? And he answered and said to them, it is one of the 12 who dips with me in the dish. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it was written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had never been born. Two things. Talk a little bit about Judas here in a minute. But I want you to notice that when Jesus made the statement that one of them would betray him, all eyes didn't go to Judas. It wasn't like, let's state the obvious or whatever. But each man in his heart legitimately asked the question, is it me? And so I don't want to paint Judas as a reincarnation of the devil right now, that he had to wear a hat to hide the horns and all of that sort of thing. I truly believe that Jesus loved Judas. And this betrayal in the garden wasn't something that he would just shrug his shoulders over, but he poured out into all of the disciples. But this matter of free will, this matter of the messianic king who's going to drive out the Romans, is what I think drove Judas to his betrayal. So Judas was sitting in the place of honor at the Lord's left. John was reclining on his right. We read about that in John chapter 13. When Jesus confronted Judas, he quickly left to improvise any available arrangements. And then this whole issue of his being lost and better never to have been born. Judas was lost for the same reason that millions are lost today. He did not repent of his sins. He did not repent and believe on the Lord Jesus. Now, the same thing can be said of any who are not born again. One day you too will wish you'd never been born at all. It should be something that keeps us in the forefront of our mind, praying that the Lord would open doors for us to share that good news of the gospel. Well, the setting, I've given you two pictures. First, the traditional Lord's Supper painting where you have a table, Jesus is in the middle, and the disciples are on both sides of him. You've seen this picture before. But more likely than not, the second picture that you see sort of the disciples reclining around this U-shaped table. This would have been more likely what this Last Supper would have been like. Verse 22, Jesus is now going to transform the Seder. He's going to institute the Lord's Supper. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." He then took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many. Assuredly, I say to you, I will no longer drink of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of heaven." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Now, there are 4 traditional cups of the Passover, of the Seder. You can read about these in Exodus 6 and 7. And here are the 4 cups. Exodus 6 says, Therefore say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out. Cup number 1, I'll bring you out. That's consecration. I'll bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you. Cup number 2, I will rescue you, a cup of deliverance from their bondage. And I will redeem you. Cup number 3, the cup of redemption, with an outstretched arm and with great judgment. And then the last cup, number 4, I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. That's the cup of the wedding feast. And I will be your God, and then you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. So again, in the other Gospels, we find that it's this 3rd cup that Jesus institutes as the cup of redemption. And the 4th cup, notice, they left before he drank, I'll take you to be my people, the wedding feast. He says, I won't drink that 4th cup until I drink it with you in the kingdom of heaven, at the marriage feast of the Lamb. Still yet to come. Jesus is now going to predict Peter's decline. It's not hard for us to identify with Peter. He's the ready, shoot, aim guy. So in verse 27, it says, Then Jesus said to them, All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night, for it's written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to the Galilee. I always like to point that out. I think the Galilee obviously was one of Jesus's favorite places to be. He could have probably met them anywhere, but he called them up there. It's kind of what I refer to as his school of discipleship. But there's that special beach on the northern shore. We often refer to it as Redemption Beach. And so this is a special beach, obviously, to Peter, and I know it is for me. I know it's my wife's favorite place to be in all of Israel. So Jesus says, when it's all said and done, when I'm risen, I'm going to meet you all in the Galilee. Verse 29, and Peter said to him, you know what? Even if all are made to stumble, yet I will not be. You can almost see Peter looking at all the other disciples and said, yeah, I get it, but you know what? I'm the rock. You can depend on me. And if all of these deny you, never me. And so Jesus then says, Peter said to him, I should say, even if they all stumble, it won't be me. And Jesus says in verse 30, Surely I say to you that today, even this night, before the rooster crows twice, you, Peter, will deny me 3 times. But he spoke more vehemently, if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And then they all said likewise. Well, one of our discussion questions will be about this tonight. And now they make their way to this one of the favorite places of Jesus, the Garden of Gethsemane. The place, that word actually means the place of where olive oils were crushed. It's a place of crushing. And so they came to a place which was named Gethsemane. And again, Jesus will begin. I often say that this is where the blood trail begins, because it's here that he begins to take on the sins of the world, and that crushing begins here. So he's at Gethsemane, and he says to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took Peter, James, and John with him, and he began to be troubled and deeply distressed. Again, we've talked about, I love to see when the writers give us a glimpse at the emotions of Jesus. So it's not just shrugging his shoulder, playing the God card, but he's fully human and fully God. And here he's deeply troubled, he's distressed. And then he says to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch." He went a little farther and he fell on the ground and he prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will." Obviously, here in his humanness, Jesus wanted human compassion. He had been with his boys for quite some time, and he needed someone to lean on during this intense time of the pressing, the burden, the taking on, and knowing that it's not just a physical torture, but it will be ultimately the broken fellowship with the Father that will cause him to yield up his spirit. "If it were possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless." Aren't you glad that nevertheless is there? "Not my will, but thy will be done." Here's some of my favorite pictures of this special garden, the Garden of Gethsemane. And so again, what was happening in Gethsemane? He's overtaken with fear, with horror. He knew what was coming. The verse that I've been referring to is 2 Corinthians 5, verse 21. "For he hath made him to be sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him." It's at this time that the sin of mankind is being placed on our Passover lamb, and he knew it. He would bear the entire curse of the law. Galatians 3:13, "Jesus hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it's written, cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree." Jesus says, is there another way? Was it possible? And if there was another way, when he brought this up, his prayer wasn't answered. It wasn't the physical aspects that concerned him. It was the realization that this would involve being forsaken by his Father. The prayer in Mark 15:34 is the only time that he doesn't address God as Father. He knew. Verse 37, "Then he came and he found those that he needed comfort. He found his disciples sleeping and said to Peter, 'Simon,'" notice the name, Simon, he doesn't say rock, "Simon, why are you sleeping? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray." Watch and pray. 2 words that we need to be mindful of today as well. Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, he went away and prayed, spoke the same words, and when he returned, he found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And then he came the third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? It's enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." The other Gospels tell us that he was sweating drops of blood at this time, the intensity of that pressing of Gethsemane. And immediately, while he was still speaking to his disciples, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude, with swords, clubs, came from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Verse 44, now his betrayer had given them a signal, saying, "Whomever I kiss, he's the one. Seize him and lead him away safely." Interesting. As soon as he had come, immediately he went up to him and he said, "Rabbi, Rabbi," and he kissed him. And then they laid hands on him and they took him. And one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And then Jesus answered and said to them, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to take me? I was daily with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me, but the scriptures must be fulfilled." And then they all forsook him, just like he said, and they fled. Remember what I said in the very beginning. Be mindful of who's in charge. This would have been a chaotic mob scene. I mean, the disciples, once again, clueless. Wrong weapons, wrong timing, wrong purpose, wrong motives. They missed it. They wanted him to be the delivering Messiah, and he was being taken from them. And so, as he said, this night, all of you will be scattered, and they were, and Jesus is now left completely alone. Just be mindful that you don't fight spiritual battles with physical weapons. 2 Corinthians 10 says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we don't war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds." And one of these chief weapons, two in particular, is the weapon and the power of prayer, as well as the power of the Word of God, which is the sword of the Spirit. And now, verse 51, many believe that this is actually Mark himself. Since Mark's writing this, we read that a certain man followed him, having a linen cloth thrown around his naked body, and the young men laid hold of him, and he left the linen cloth, and he fled from them naked. Now verse 53. And they led Jesus away to the high priest, and with him were assembled all the chief priests, the elders and the scribes. But Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he sat with the servants. He warmed himself at the fire. And now the chief priests and all the council sought testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but none could be found. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimonies did not agree. And then some rose up and bore false witness against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I'll destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build it up.' or will build another made without hands. But not even then did their testimony agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst of all of this, and he asked Jesus, saying, "Do you answer nothing? What is it that these men testify against you?" But he kept silent, and he answered nothing. Again, the high priest asked him, saying, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed?" He kept silent like a lamb being silent before its shears, its slayer. Isaiah 53:7, 1 Peter 2:23. But now Jesus is going to speak. When the question was asked, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" verse 62, Jesus says, "I am. And you will see the power of the Son of Man at the right hand of God and coming with the clouds of heaven." And then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "What further need do we have of witnesses? You've heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" And they all condemned him to be deserving of death. And then some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, to beat him, and to say to him, "Prophesy." And the officers struck him with the palms of their hand. The Son of Man, a messianic title, by the way, Daniel 7, verse 13. And now as we wrap this up, verse 66, now as Peter was below in the courtyard, remember he followed at a distance. One of the servant girls of the high priest came, and when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You also were with Jesus of Nazareth." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know nor understand what you're saying." And he went out on the porch, and a rooster crowed. I remember reading this statement: if you warm yourself at the enemy's fire, you will get burned. And servant girl saw him again, began to say to those who stood by, "This is one of them," but he denied it again. And a little later, those who stood by said to Peter again, "Surely you are one of them, for you're a Galilean, and your speech shows it." And then he began to curse. He cursed, and it says that he swore, "I do not know this man of who you speak." And upon making this statement a second time, the rooster crowed. And then Peter called to mind the words that Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you'll deny me 3 times. And when he thought about it, he wept. Here's a picture in your PDF of that courtyard. And then something to think about as we pull this teaching to an end. Before we judge Peter too severely, we need to examine ourselves. How many times have we denied the Lord and lost opportunities to share with others? Do we talk like Peter when we should be listening? Do we argue when we should be obeying? Do we find other things? Do we sleep when we should be praying? And do we draw our swords to fight when we should be submitting? Peter repents. He's going to have a private meeting with Jesus at that beach that I was talking to you about up in the Galilee. And I've concluded the study tonight with a couple photos of that beach, that place that's called Tabcha, but we often refer to it as Redemption Beach. Well, our discussion questions for today, number 1 is, why do you think that each disciple asked Jesus if they were the ones who would betray him? And what was happening in Gethsemane, both physically to Jesus mentally as well to Jesus, and spiritually. What was transpiring in that garden? Third question, in what ways today do we sometimes follow Jesus at a distance? And finally, when was the last time you had a one-on-one with Jesus at Redemption Beach? Those are the questions. I hope, obviously, I think this evening would be, or today's service would be a good time to remember him in communion as well, because it truly is Holy Ground. Well, as you know, as you watch this video, we're in Israel, and we would ask for you to continue to be praying for us. We have an amazing opportunity to walk our Jackson through this land, and I pray that God, in a sense, brings all of these things to life for him. Black and white words of the Bible, living color as he's walking this land. And you too. I pray that if you haven't been to Israel, that you would visit Israel soon. And selfishly, we would love for you to come with us. God bless you all. Take care. Shalom.